just you and I.
All right, so we talked about the risks of the various service models, as well as the various deployment models and their risks. So now we're going to talk about the cloud security process at a very high level. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the cloud security process, the security considerations for each step of the process, and also stakeholder considerations in the cloud process. All right, this diagram is provided by the Cloud Security Alliance, and I think it really lays out the high-level steps for determining cloud security in a very succinct way. The first step is to identify requirements. Now, when we're thinking about security, and specifically cloud security, there always has to be a business case for why it makes sense to go to the cloud. No business just says, oh, I think this is cool, I think we're going to do this. So the first step is to identify the requirements based on the business case. How is your business really leveraging the cloud, either the service models or the deployment models, to expand what they do and gain a competitive advantage? And then based on that, what are the inherent risks in what they're trying to do in the cloud? How will the backups work? How is processing activities, how are they going to be monitored? Who needs access to this? What are the real services or applications that are going to be hosted out there in the cloud? And how are they going to be supported? This step is really about the why, and it really drives all of the other security concerns, because security is really about managing risk and reducing it to levels that are acceptable within the organization's risk tolerance and risk appetite. All right, then we move on to selecting a provider, a service, and a deployment model. So we established the why in the first step. Now we're really investigating the vendors and trying to figure out which of these vendors truly meets our needs. And this is when vendor management is a critical consideration, being able to interpret those risks that are associated with vendors, many of them that we've talked about, such as vendor lock-in and lock-out, being able to effectively look at any documentation providers provide based on their controls or third-party audits, and look for any holes or gaps that might be missing based on your business requirements and the controls that they have in place. Step 3 is defining the architecture. This is really where, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. That's really what's going on in the architecture step, is looking and building a picture of all the servers, all the applications, all the APIs, really understanding fully what the application is going to look like, helps to inform all the security considerations between how are different applications and connections going to securely authenticate to each other. Are there places where we're going to have to use APIs to connect to other applications within our environment? Is this a multi-cloud environment where we need to traverse across the internet and need to secure that data in transit? So defining the architecture helps to really create a solid picture of what you're really doing in the cloud. What are all the assets that need protecting? How are these things communicating to each other? How do those communications need to be protected? How are any storage things being stored out in the cloud, and what are the parameters around that? As well as who is managing what? That's always one of those critical aspects that deals with the cloud. There's the shared responsibility between the provider and then the customer, or potentially multiple providers and vendors. Then we want to assess security controls. We know the why, we know who is involved from the third-party perspective, we know what our application is going to look like, what the architecture of what we're doing in the cloud is going to look like. And now we need to think about what security frameworks and controls do we need applied? What regulations are applicable to our industry that need to be implemented when we're going to make a push and leverage all those great characteristics of the cloud? Once those security controls have been identified, then you really need to do the gap analysis. What controls does our organization already currently have in place on our on-premise solution? And then what do we need to do in the cloud? A lot of these gaps come around third-party management, as I've said, because you really don't necessarily know completely what the controls are of these other organizations that may be responsible for critical aspects of your cloud infrastructure. You need to build effective communication, have effective contracts and service level agreements to ensure that these gaps are addressed or at least monitored, and put in effective monitoring to ensure that any indications of incidents or deviations from performance are addressed quickly. And then there's designing and implementing the controls. You know the why, you know what standards you're trying to meet, you know what your gaps are. So now you really need to adapt any controls to the cloud environment to ensure that they meet your organization's business objectives, their risk objectives, and then any security control requirements based on the framework that you've chosen to mitigate your risk or legal requirements. And then finally, you need to manage changes. Remember, the cloud is based on the ability to scale things up and break things down and build environments when you want to. There's a lot of change. It's dynamic. That's one of the benefits of moving to the cloud. However, from a security perspective, you must manage that change. Technology never just stays the same. There are always new changes in terms of what is available in the cloud, new applications, new vendors, as well as new threats that appear out there. So you need to manage those changes effectively to get the most out of the cloud in a secure manner. All right, time for a quiz question. What is the most important step in the cloud security process? 1, identify requirements. 2, define architecture. 3, designing and implementing controls. While there's an argument to be made that all of these are important, I would argue that identify requirements is really the most important fundamental step because, as I said, security is driven by the business case. What is the business value your organization is getting? And then what are the risks that come with that business case and putting it in the cloud? Because that is really going to drive all the other steps when it comes to security in the cloud. All right. In this lesson, we talked about the steps of the cloud security process, the security considerations at each step, and how business needs and controls drive and controlling risks drive this whole process. I hope you got a lot out of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one.